Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you. I suppose Twitter has been under pressure for so many things that happen on its social media platform. But tell us about what might be of concern to them in Ethiopia.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's always a pleasure to come on your platform. I think there are a few issues there. I think over the last few years, not years now, it's been 14 months since the conflict in Ethiopia erupted. The social media space, particularly Twitter and Facebook as well, became one of the arenas where the conflict was fought. It's no longer just a question of fighting it, in the conflict area, but also these places became a battlefield. For anybody who's been paying, even a veneer of attention to it, you've seen it's not something that is just located within Ethiopia or even the Ethiopian diasporas. Some, purported left-wing, journalists or media influencers from the West, particularly the United States, have taken it upon themselves to, allegedly counter what they deem is Western biased in coverage of the Ethiopian conflict. So hashtags like hands off have been around for the past few months, and it is led to a lot of problems. Anybody who has observed at least this conflict, you'll see safety cry on one side, hands off Ethiopia on the other side, and they have been competing. But the fundamental problem really for the Africa, either during conflict, during crisis, or during elections, like enough number of African countries are going to host elections this year, is that these spaces are becoming incredibly ungovernable, not just for the African countries, but also in the West, where these media technology companies are located. It is very difficult for the African countries because most of these companies, while they seem to be working on this on the continent, for instance, including Ethiopia, they hardly have the offices there, largely satellite offices, and they don't pay taxes, but they have a disproportionate amount of influence in shaping the discussions and narratives.
How has this messaging translated into the conflict? I mean, can we see cause and effect?
It is difficult with respect to what extent then this has led to more or less conflict. That's a very good question. But what we can say for certain is, at least on these platforms, I don't have, empirical evidence to demonstrate that what has continued online has translated into online conflict or otherwise. But what I can say without, with a fair degree of certainty is that it has made discussions on Ethiopia incredibly fraught. It is an incredibly toxic environment where, I question myself, if these people who are on these spaces cannot even agree on basic facts, like how did the conflict start? November 2nd, they do not agree on if there is a blockade on, the Tigray region, then how can we have, a discussion eventually about how to resolve the Ethiopian conflict? This is not to suggest that this is fated. It's going to be impossible to find a solution from that. It is how this has made the discourse really, really poisonous.
So where does one draw the line? Because, if the state is accused of human rights abuses, then the citizens that are being abused can only tell their story on social media. And to get that story out, they must use hashtags, otherwise it won't be seen. So where does one start to adjudicate whether this is propaganda, incitement, or a story of abuse that people want to express?
That is a very important question, Peter, and it's a question that is at the heart of legislations in many jurisdictions as far as policy is concerned. Within the EU, within the United States, the question around privacy, the disproportionate amount of influence that these media technology companies or social media platforms, if you prefer, have when it comes to shaping discourses. In our case, in most African countries, it becomes very difficult, right? Access to the media is, safe for, very few countries. It's largely controlled by the state directly or indirectly through advertising us, more than, the old ways of coming to a studio and kicking everybody out, or, arresting and preferring charges against journalists, because the government, let's face it, most African countries, is the largest advertiser. And you wouldn't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. So that becomes very difficult. But I think where one could draw the line, for me, one thing that is very important, and there are no easy answers to it, people are better versed than me, are struggling with it as well, is the governance of the social media platforms. This, I think, we can slice it the way we want it. We cannot run away from it. These institutions are bigger. They are well endowed than certain states. I think discussions have to be hard on how they can be made accountable. For instance, if somebody defames you online, what other avenues for redress do you have? All right, and these are issues that are here and now. It's not just a question of privacy, it's a question of governance of these institutions. I think those discussions, whether it means, you cannot keep on amending your laws and policies all the time, because technology will always, those laws will always catch up to the technology. But I think what we have right now doesn't even address the rudimentary part of this. And I think for most countries, that would be very important. Again, while doing that, however, we've got to be very careful that, marginalized voices are not, shut down.
I suppose the challenge as well, as you said, a lot of these big social media companies are not based in Tigray. They're not based in these areas of conflict. And so they're making decisions about things on the ground that they are not there to witness and often don't have a context for what they're seeing.
I don't think they even have, let's say, Tigray translators. People who know the language, people who know and understand the language. And again, you are a communicator. I mean, what can be used in one context can have a different meaning in different contexts. Forget about the nuances. Do they even speak the language? And I think this is where governance of these platforms, their heady days are over, where we thought that we all bought into the utopia that these platforms will take us into a nirvana. That is gone, and it's long gone. And I think there is a need for legislators, there is a need using the communication authorities that are spread across most African countries to bring these institutions into a heel, because if they are poisoning the discourse, not them by themselves, but by providing spaces for people to say things that are not really accurate. For instance, how some of the anti-vaccine notions are being spread across most African countries. It's largely through Facebook as well as WhatsApp messages. Can we find a way? The reality is, as of now, these institutions have demonstrated that they cannot self-regulate. They need to be regulated as such. Otherwise, the damage that they cause might be much, much greater than the good that they provide.
The other side of this, of course, is that it's actually physically impossible to monitor and to police the internet, particularly these social media platforms with billions of users.
It is very difficult. And, the thing was, the rate at which they grew is exponential. I mean, Facebook just started a few years ago. It is now a behemoth that even the United States government cannot with good faith say that they are able to control. They have started moving, against them, largely the big ones, Facebook, Microsoft, and the rest. The other one is Facebook, Microsoft, Google, as well as Amazon. These are the four major ones. They have started, invoking antitrust laws because Google control literally over 60% of all the advertising. The rest is with Amazon. Amazon controls literally everything, and so they wield disproportionate amount of power. And some of the cost is people have stopped reading the newspapers. Advertisers are going online rather than using the newspapers and the other media outlets. As a result, these guys have grown so big. And the algorithm that they use is a dark hole. We don't know why certain stories rise up and they call it trending, or certain videos go viral. We have no idea. It's they invoke proprietary rights for some of those technologies, but the cost is shared by everybody. And I think for us, particularly on the continent, these have got serious implications. Just to give you a sense, during Kenya's election in 2017, I think, some of these platforms were used to spread tremendous amount of hate in an election that is generally, elections for most African countries, particularly Kenya, is where all the fears, dreams, and hopes are they are all brought together, and they tend to exploit that. And it almost caused problems. Quote unquote, you had civil wars, at least within the social media platform. It just takes, a very good entrepreneur for that to go into offline, and we will be having problems for how much in taxes do these organizations pay. They are negligible because most of the taxes are offshore. I think there are many ways that can be used to bring them to the heel at the very minimum without necessarily losing some of the benefits, and there are many that they bring to the table.
I mean, these platforms have enormous power, as you mentioned. November last year, Twitter stopped the trends, showing the trends, what people were seeing and what was popular in Ethiopia. And I guess a fear might be that legitimate voices may be silenced in the middle of a crisis.
Absolutely. There is no doubt about that. There is no doubt that, whereas to a greater degree, you can understand the reasoning that went behind them taking that step. But in the totality of the outcome, there were definitely, legitimate voices that were silenced. So, and then you've got to step back and ask yourself, why are we allowing a media company that is private, that is not located in Ethiopia or in any of African countries, apart from satellite offices, to dictate the terms to something that is as delicate as an election, something that is incredibly sensitive as the Tigray conflict, right? It is about time then some of the, African government and authorities to act in a very nuanced way, not the blunt force of shutting it down, not the blunt force of, no, you're not going to operate in our countries. But also I want to remind, our viewers that if you look at the percentage of electricity penetration in most of the African countries, if you look at the internet penetration in most of these countries, if you look at people who have got smartphones and then therefore be able to access these, it is a negligible percentage, right? But these negligible percentages of population or pockets of population will end up determining something that is very fundamental. So if we cannot control now, let's say 15, 20% that have got access to this, then how would we be able, when electricity penetration, internet penetration, smartphone penetration increases, we will not have time. We might not have all the tools right now, we might never. But I think we are at a space where we can begin using the tools that we have, not in a blunt way, but in a fairly nuanced, clever, strategic ways to prevent the damage.
Abdullahi, thanks so much indeed for a fascinating conversation. Let's see what happens next. But I think these types of things will always start to give us pause to think about the power that these social media platforms have and how they maybe should be regulated. But thanks for your thoughts tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a nice week.